Have you ever come home after a long trip only to find that your pigeon has somehow managed to escape its cage? It seems like no matter how well you think you've secured their cage, these little birds always find a way out, and it doesn't stop there. Pigeons are known for being able to travel hundreds of miles in a single day, all without getting lost. So how do they do it? What is it about pigeons that allows them to always find their way back home? To understand how pigeons navigate, we first need to understand how they see the world. Unlike humans, who rely primarily on sight, pigeons use a combination of sight, smell, and other sensory cues to get around. When it comes to finding their way home, though, sight is by far the most important sense for pigeons. In fact, pigeons have excellent eyesight. They can see much better in low light conditions than we can, and they have a much wider field of view. This means that when a pigeon is flying, it can see everything that's going on around it at all times. And because pigeons can see ultraviolet light, they can see things that we can't even imagine. But how does this help them to find their way home? Well, it turns out that pigeons use the sun for navigation. But not just the sun, the polarization pattern created by light reflecting off of different surfaces. You see, when light bounces off of a surface, it changes direction depending on the angle at which it hits the surface. This change in direction is called the angle of reflection. Now, when the angle of reflection is equal to the angle of incidence, the light is said to be totally reflected. This means that the light bounces off of the surface at the same angle that it hits the surface. For example, if a ray of light hits a mirror at a 45-degree angle, it will be reflected at a 45-degree angle. However, if the angle of reflection is less than the angle of incidence, then some of the light will be reflected and some will be transmitted through the surface. This is what happens when light passes through a window. Now, when light passes through a clear object like glass, it bends or refracts as it enters the object. The amount of bending that occurs depends on the angle at which the light hits the surface and the difference between the densities of the two media. In this case, air and glass. Now, when light passes from one medium to another, like from air to glass, it slows down. This change in speed causes the light to bend towards the normal, which is a line that is perpendicular to the surface at the point where the light ray hits it. On the other hand, if light passes from a denser medium like glass to a less dense medium like air, it speeds up, and the light ray bends away from the normal. This bending of light, as it passes from one medium to another, is called refraction. Refraction is what causes light to bend when it passes through a prism, for example. Because of refraction, the colors of white light are separated as they pass through the prism, resulting in a rainbow-like spectrum. So now we know that when light passes through an object, it bends, and this bending can cause the light to separate into its different wavelengths or colors. Now let's go back to pigeons. Pigeons, like all birds, have a nictitating membrane that is a transparent eyelid that protects the eye while the bird is flying. This membrane is made up of several layers of tissue, but the outermost layer is a single layer of epithelial cells. These cells are packed with microvilli, which are tiny hair-like projections that increase the surface area of the cell. The microvilli are coated with guanine crystals that reflect light. This layer of guanine crystals acts as a mirror, reflecting the light back out of the eye. But because the guanine crystals are not perfectly smooth, the light is scattered in all directions. This scattering of light creates a hazy effect in the pigeon's eye, which reduces the amount of glare that the pigeon sees. This is important for pigeons because it allows them to see objects that are close to them without being blinded by the bright light reflecting off of those objects. What's really amazing is that the pigeon's nictitating membrane can change the amount of light that is scattered in its eye. By doing this, the pigeon can adjust the amount of glare that it sees. For example, when a pigeon is flying in bright sunlight, it can make its nictitating membrane more reflective so that it sees less glare. When it flies into a dark cave, it can make its nictitating membrane less reflective so that it can see better in the dark. This is thanks to a group of muscles called the sphincter muscles, which are located around the edge of the nictitating membrane. These muscles contract to make the membrane more reflective and relax to make the membrane less reflective. Now you might be wondering why this is important for the pigeon's ability to navigate. Well, it turns out that the amount of glare that a pigeon sees can affect the way that it sees polarized light. Remember that polarized light is light that has been reflected off of a surface and has become partially organized in a particular direction. The amount of organization or polarization of the light is measured in degrees. Light that is completely unpolarized, like the light from the sun, can be represented as a wave that is moving in all directions. As the light bounces off of different surfaces, it becomes more and more polarized. For example, light that is reflected off of a calm body of water is usually more polarized than light that is reflected off of a rough body of water. Pigeons, like bees and some species of butterflies, can see polarized light. They have special photoreceptor cells in their retinas that are sensitive to the polarization of light. These cells contain proteins called cryptochromes, which are blue light receptors that are sensitive to the polarization of light. Cryptochromes are found in many animals, including birds, insects, fish, and mammals. In some animals, like honeybees, cryptochromes are used for magnetoreception, which is the ability to sense the Earth's magnetic field. In birds, cryptochromes are thought to be involved in both magnetoreception and the ability to see polarized light. When a pigeon flies, it uses the polarization pattern of the sky to help it navigate. The pigeon can tell the direction of the sun by looking at the polarization pattern in the sky. This helps the pigeon maintain a constant bearing while it's flying. In other words, the pigeon can keep flying in the same direction without having to turn around or make any adjustments. If the sky is overcast or there is no distinct polarization pattern, the pigeon can still use the sun to maintain its bearing. This is because the pigeon can see the sun even when it's hidden behind clouds. The pigeon can also see the polarization pattern on water, which is why they are such good at navigating over water. Pigeons also use the polarization pattern to help them find their way home. When a pigeon is released far from home, it will fly in a random direction for a while. Once the pigeon has flown far enough away from its release point, it will begin to search for familiar landmarks. The pigeon uses the polarization pattern to help it identify these landmarks. For example, the pigeon may see a river that has a different polarization pattern than the surrounding landscape. This helps the pigeon orient itself and determine where it is relative to its home. Once the pigeon has oriented itself, it can use the sun to navigate directly to its home. In fact, pigeons are so good at using polarized light to find their way home that researchers have been able to trick them by manipulating the polarization pattern in the sky. Researchers have found that pigeons are able to compensate for these manipulations and still find their way home. This shows just how flexible and adaptable pigeons are when it comes to navigation. But it doesn't stop there. Pigeons are also able to compensate for changes in the Earth's magnetic field. This is important because the Earth's magnetic field is constantly changing. As the sun's activity changes, the Earth's magnetic field is affected, which makes it harder for animals that rely on the Earth's magnetic field for navigation. But pigeons are able to compensate for these changes and still find their way home. So how do they do it? Well, it turns out that pigeons have a built-in compass that allows them to sense the Earth's magnetic field. This compass is located in the pigeon's brain, and it's made up of a group of neurons that respond to changes in the Earth's magnetic field. When the pigeon's compass is activated, it sends signals to the pigeon's optic tectum, which is an area of the brain that is involved in visual processing. The optic tectum then sends signals to the rest of the brain, which causes the pigeon to orient itself along the magnetic field lines.
Ow.
This allows the pigeon to maintain a constant bearing while it's flying. It's truly amazing how these little birds are able to navigate. They use a combination of the sun, stars, landmarks, and even the Earth's magnetic field to find their way home. So the next time you see a pigeon, remember that it's a highly skilled navigator that has traveled all over the world. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.